Hey everyone, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat podcast, wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today. So glad you are here. And if you are new to the podcast, welcome. So glad you're here. I hope you'll go back and check out all the episodes. We're at over 200 episodes now. So there's so many great micro topics and wonderful things that have shown up on the podcast, as well as great conversations, much like you're going to hear today with great guests that have joined me. Just so grateful for the wonderful people and messages that have been a part of this podcast and continues to grow. If you're one of the OGs that have been with us from the very beginning, thanks for coming back, and glad that this continues to add value to your life and your work. My commitment, as always, is hopefully that these little conversations and these little micro topics and pods are a way for you to step back, take a deep breath, and think about the temperature that you're trying to set with yourself, your life, and certainly with the organization that you may serve. So we know, my belief is that we know that we need humans, we need people, we need leaders, we need teams, and we need organizations that are breathing good oxygen into people and certainly into the world that we're living in right now. So we know that the best leaders, teams, and organizations set the temperature for the culture that they desire. So glad you're back for the conversation we're going to have today. Before we dive into today, of course, I have to ask this: if you'll rate the podcast 5 stars, leave an authentic review in your own words, share it with people. Those are all the ways the algorithms work and help other people find it. So thanks for everybody that does that. I am super excited to invite in my guest for today into the chat in just a minute, a past guest and wonderful person and somebody that I can now call a friend. Doug Ulman is the president and CEO of Pelotonia, which was established in 2008 with the objective to fund life-saving cancer research, and is a rapidly growing nonprofit. In 15 years, if I have these, the stats are always growing, so these might be the there might be new stats, but in 15 years, think about this, they've rallied over 40,000 participants, 700,000 plus donors, and over $270 million for cancer research. Doug himself is a 3-time cancer survivor and globally recognized cancer advocate. He's been celebrated as one of the top 50 nonprofit executives list, and just a caring and compassionate leader. And again, lucky to call him friend. So welcome, Doug Ulman.
Thanks for having me back.
Buddy, you get an invite back when you're the audience calls for it. You're a special dude, and selfishly, I love every time we get a chance to talk to each other. So thanks for making time just for a quick little chat.
Of course, feelings mutual. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, let me for the listeners, let me give a little context to today's chat. And this will be a quick shout out to the Germain Automotive Partnership, because at a recent all hands culture summit, which I'm lucky to support the Germains and all they're doing to shape culture across their organization, about 3 times a year, we bring all of their people together, and we have these couple of days of culture summits where we talk about topics that are related to their core values as a company, and then engage the minds and hearts of their employees around what does it really look like in action and behavior to live those core values, not only in their life, but certainly throughout, their work and throughout the Germain organization. And so we had gathered for a recent one where we were celebrating a couple of their core values of what does it mean to engage, make a choice in your mindset to engage, and then the other core values of innovate and to find a better way to do something. And so I framed up the topics for the day and for the event and tried my best to kind of frame up the conversation. And in doing so, I used a psychology term that talked about the diffusion of responsibility, which is often linked. In fact, you'll hear another podcast episode that I'm going to focus really all on that particular topic. But this idea that research and studies have shown that, especially in times of crisis and or just times when people aren't sure what behavior or action is needed, that oftentimes there's a diffusion of responsibility where in our mindset, we make a decision that, oh, somebody else will handle it. And so we kind of let ourselves off the hook by diffusing that responsibility to somebody else. And so we were talking about not diffusing the responsibility, but taking individual responsibility and collective responsibility And how do we engage our minds in that choice to engage and take the collective responsibility? But then also, what does it mean to seek new solutions, stimulate progress, innovate, no matter what the role is for somebody, to find a new way to do something? I was reminded of Jim Collins's work. You know, Jim Collins, the author that wrote Good to Great. And I think the even better book is the one called Built to Last that he wrote, where he studied companies that, why did some companies last over a 100-year period, and ones that had very similar market conditions and people and products and services, why did others not last? And one of the key findings was that the companies that lasted did two things simultaneously throughout their work. One is they preserved the core. They preserved the very core of who they were and the very best of what they did in the past, but they didn't get stuck in the past. They brought the very best forward. And at the same time, the yang of that, the yin and the yang was they stimulated progress. They were always asking the question of what was next? How could they find new ways to do what they do better? So in that, framing up that, Doug Ulman was a wonderful panelist during that event, and those words came to my mind because, as always, he dropped some great language on us. And so, Doug, tell us about this idea that you shared on the panel where you talked about the mindset around the power of yet.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jason. My daughter, who's in 7th grade, came home one day. This would have been 5 years ago. And she asked me, she came from school and she said, "Dad, have you learned about the power of yet?" I had no idea what she was talking about. I mean, no idea. And it started this conversation. And at that time, her teacher, Miss Kroll, had talked to the students about a growth mindset. And how do you build that curiosity? And how do you build that sort of commitment to seeking to learn and seeking to grow? And Clara said to me, "But do you know the power of yet?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, Miss Kroll, when she asks a question, she doesn't allow us to say, 'I don't know,' or 'I am not sure.' It's, 'I have not learned that yet. I have not experienced that yet. I haven't been prepared for that yet." And that just builds this idea that you can create the future through knowledge and curiosity and seeking information and understanding. And we all have room to grow. And so we're all also limited in what we know today. And I think as leaders, sometimes we're expected to have all the answers, and yet we don't. And so this idea of the power of yet, taught to me by a 2nd grader, my daughter, through the lens of her teacher, was eye-opening, and it's something I think about all the time.
Well, I as soon as you said it, I mean, I even said it to you right when we were on stage together. I said, "Oh my gosh, like, we're going to talk about this some more later," because, and I'm a geek and a weird guy that loves language, and I love that connection, how quickly you can wrap your head around that idea. And yet what resonates with me, and by the way, it's not a surprise that your daughter's teaching us, it's not a surprise that kids are reminding us, because so many of us, I mean, I think this is part of the research around fixed mindsets, is that oftentimes, even as we get older, our minds get even more fixed, because we cling to what we know, we cling to what's safe. And yet here we are, kids reminding us, and it sounds like a fabulous teacher, but somebody reminding us to challenge that thinking. And I love that. I haven't experienced that yet. I haven't learned that yet. I haven't had time to think about that yet. And so, and which we're going to go into that in just a second, how it relates to leading teams and organizations, when oftentimes you are in a position where people think you're supposed to have all the answers, which is ridiculous in and of itself. But we're going to talk about that in a second. But what I'm also interested in, because you started with it coming from your daughter and from family, is for Doug Ulman, when you think about the power of yet, what does the power of yet and that choice of that kind of mindset, how does that relate to hopefully how you show up as a father and are curious about that, or a husband or a friend, like before we talk work stuff, like how does the
Yeah.
power of yet play with that?
It's a good question. I mean, look, I think it's a struggle we all have as parents, is how do you instill, again, that level of curiosity and sort of striving to learn in everything that we do. And, in our family, I used to get really upset when people would say, I can't. Hmm. And I will tell you, I think the power of yet sort of reframe that, because can't has sort of a negativity. And the power of yet has a positive connotation in my mind. It's like, oh, no, I'm going to get there. I just haven't gotten there yet. I just haven't had time to do that yet, or I haven't had that experience yet, et cetera. And so it sort of reframed for me this notion of, we used to say in our house to our kids, like, don't say can't, never say can't, anything's possible, all this stuff. And it like wasn't resonating at all. And it came across as like punitive, like, oh, dad's going to be mad if I say can't, and I think this just reframed it in a way of like, I'm going to strive for something. And I may not know it yet, but someday I'm going to know that, or I'm going to understand it, or I'm going to experience it. And I think it just goes hand in hand with this notion of, anything's possible. And if you live with that sort of mindset, I think you're willing to take chances, take calculated risks, set goals that seem a bit unachievable, and sort of go a little bit further than otherwise.
Yeah, I love, again, where my brain quickly goes. I'm flashing back to times when kids come and grab you, and they want, they want to quickly interrupt something, or they don't understand the big schedule or things that are going on, and they want to do something, and yet how easy it is to say we can't do that, or and kind of shut down the idea, and yet right. reframing it in that way to say, hey, that doesn't work for this weekend, right. but we're going to get to do that, the like, when can we do that together? Or I think about the way that it interplays with any kind of relationship, and certainly a marriage or a friendship, or a this I know Amy and I are very much living in this space of trying to say, what is it that is yet to come? What is it that we want to create? What is it that we want to experience and certainly be about in the world? And so it does shift it from that kind of fixed, rear view mirror thinking of what's happened, and puts you out the windshield of, hey, where is it we're actually trying to go, and what can we create together?
Absolutely. It's again, to me, it just reframes it in such a positive way, and seeing it through the lens of kids is great. And, it's funny. I was talking to my daughter this morning because she's really into Duolingo and sort of language. And yesterday, and maybe I'm late to the party, but yesterday we got this email saying that Duolingo had just added math and music. And now you can learn music, one day at a time, 5 minutes at a time, 3 minutes, whatever it is. And to see just sort of, again, her light up at the notion of like, I might not know that yet, but if I start, I'm going to learn it. I'm going to sort of reach that level of knowledge or understanding. I don't know. I think it's a good thing for the world.
Yeah, it's powerful. And it's a reminder to all of us, again, and I'll make the transition into teams and organizations, is that all the time we hear throughout organizations say, oh, I don't, I'll pick up, I hear this through older generations in organizations all the time as, oh, I'm bad at technology, or I don't know that, or I can't do that. And yet, what if we could adopt that same spirit that you just described? Is again, I don't know that yet, but if I begin now, I will begin to learn these new things. And certainly you lead an organization, you lead a team of people. And part of your challenge, as I know you and I have talked about, is every new year, you guys are hitting all these new marks. You're, getting to these levels that have never been achieved before. And so it would be really easy to just say, hey, kind of let's do what we did last year. But how does the power of yet and that kind of mindset play into rallying your team and or rallying a group of people for the next challenge?
Totally. I mean, look, we just celebrated our fundraising campaign for this year. And so we joke, but literally the next day it starts at zero. It's back to zero. And we're really fortunate. We have a culture of talented colleagues whereby I think people really thrive on this notion of creating things that haven't been done before. And that is synergistic with the power of yet. We haven't done that yet. We haven't tried that yet. We haven't experienced that yet. We haven't introduced our community to that concept yet. And so the willingness to take, again, I don't see it as risk, but the willingness to take what others might see as a little bit of risk to try something that either we haven't done before or others haven't done before and see what happens. And I think that really is the power of yet in an office culture. And like you said, I mean, and I think it is somewhat generational, but also beyond that in some regards, which is this notion of, oh, we don't do that. We can't do that. That's not how it works here. That's not how, like that I think is less prevalent today than maybe it was, but it depends on industry, depends on organization, depends on sort of the leadership of a company or entity. We're fortunate we've never had that. I mean, we've just always sort of had this mindset of if we aren't creating new opportunities, experiences, ways of doing things, it will fizzle out. And you talked about Jim Collins and sort of the core. We can still preserve the core.
That's right.
But everything around the core can iterate and sort of be more entrepreneurial. And that's what we've experienced. And again, it sort of all ties to this notion of we haven't tried that yet. We haven't done that yet. We haven't executed that yet. We haven't experienced that yet. Doesn't mean we shouldn't or we couldn't, and we try to.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And I again, I think it's just a general human tendency is that it's easier for us to get complacent. It's easier for us to repeat the same pattern. It's easier for us to just do what we did yesterday, right? And so we know that's a mental challenge that we all face. And so how do you help, breathe that kind of oxygen? You're right. You are a part of a team and an organization that has become the way, that the mindset that you just carry, so that it doesn't fizzle out. And because that's got to be there. But as I remind leaders and teams and organizations all the time, is that it didn't just magically happen that way. You and others have helped breathe oxygen into that kind of thinking so that you're carrying that level of curiosity, of that questioning, of that what if, of that, hey, hold on, let's not get trapped by this won't work thinking.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
how do you help cultivate that mindset with people?
Yeah, it's interesting. Look, we feel a deep commitment and responsibility to the community. And so we want to deliver unbelievable experiences for them. And we have so many passionate, long-time supporters of our mission. And so we can't give them the same experience every year. It's not fair to them. They deserve something beautiful and meaningful, and they deserve to be rewarded for their efforts. And so much of what drives us is that notion of we have to deliver these special moments and experiences for those who are making our work possible. The second thing, which will sound more selfish in a way, is that because we have a small team, we will lose great, talented people if we just do the same thing over and over again.
No doubt.
People will get bored. Now, some people like it. It may be easier, et cetera. Most of the people on our team do not. And so if you have executed an amazing experience for the community 3 years in a row, by year 4, you might be a little tired of it. And so we try to empower our team to implement and create new things all the time, selfishly, because it keeps them more engaged and it keeps them more excited. And while it's harder to create new things, it's actually what I think energizes people. And so it's sort of a balance of the core versus the new, and making sure it's just a new shiny object, which again, I struggle with sometimes because I see the new and I'm like, oh, let's go over there. but again, we have a great team that balances out that. And in a way, it's selfish because we want to create these things to keep our own sort of curiosity and entrepreneurship going.
Yeah, the image I see in my head is, again, I see the yin and the yang of that Jim Collins example of the preserve the core on the one side, and then the line that goes through the middle to separate the yin from the yang. And it's almost like it's easy to walk to that line, but yet it's scary when you think like, okay, we want to bring the very best of our past and of our core with us, but yet it's easy to kind of cling and hover there. But yet stepping over that line it can be daunting sometimes. Is like, wow, we got to come up with something new. And yet the reality is that's where the energy is too. And so we find this kind of like, oh, if we step over that line and in this space of stimulating progress, wow, like all of a sudden things happen that would have never happened, of course. And it's powerful.
Totally. And it's just like anything else in life. I mean, as you were talking, I was just thinking about a couple of years ago, some business colleagues and I went out and climbed in Colorado, and we did this rappelling off this cliff.
Oh yeah.
And it's like that first step is like, oh man, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. And as soon as you take that step, it's like, I see the world in a different way. I see the power of yet. I see, and it just frees you up in terms of how you think and how you see things. And so it's in that balance of like, how do you step off that edge?
Oh, it's a perfect image. I've been on that ledge many of times, and I've watched people on rock faces there, and it can be crippling for people. I mean, I've watched people for 30 minutes at the edge of a rock face and just mentally trying to get over that hurdle. And then you're right. As soon as that moment of trust in the system, in the rope, in the support, in the people, and belief in yourself, that you actually trust and lean back, is when then all of a sudden you felt like, oh, I'm good. And then everything changes.
Right. And when you finish that experience, you can't stop talking about it.
That's right.
You tell everybody it was magical. It was so empowering. It was so, inspiring, et cetera, et cetera. And if you can create those types of experiences in the office setting or in the work setting, I mean, that unlocks so much potential. And that's what we try to do. It's easier said than done.
Well, buddy, this is awesome. And you and I could talk all day about this stuff, but I know we're almost at our time, but I just wanted to, when you said that power of yet, and we had that moment as a part of that event, I just said, okay, we got to at least spend a few more minutes kind of diving into that. So I appreciate you sharing that. And obviously what it already gets me thinking about again, and hopefully you as the listener get you thinking about, is what does that shift of that mindset look like? How do we preserve the very core of the past, but stimulate progress? How do we not diffuse responsibility, but say, I can take responsibility. Like, what is that I'm curious about, or that I want to learn next, or that I can, what is that next step? And how does that spill out, obviously, into our lives and just the way that I enter the world as a human, as a friend, as a father, as a husband, and then certainly whatever the pursuits are for the team and organization you serve, to say, what if we thought about this differently? We haven't done that yet, but maybe there's a place to step over that line, or maybe step off that cliff a little bit and trust the people around us. So Doug, I'm so grateful for you and the work you do. And thanks for jumping on and sharing this wisdom with us.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, and all credit goes to my daughter, Clara, and her amazing teacher.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you to the listeners. Hopefully you enjoyed this little kind of quick chat about the power of yet. Obviously, that I believe that this kind of thinking, and again, we all play a role in creating the cultures that we want to be a part of. And not only do our communities need it, our families need it, our world needs it, our teams and organization need it, that we need leaders and people and humans that are breathing good oxygen into people, into our minds, into our hearts. And obviously, all of us play a role in setting the temperature for the culture that we lead. So Thank you for everybody for being a part of this. I hope you'll check out the show notes. We'll make some connections to Doug and certainly Pelotonia if you want to learn more there. I hope you'll stay connected with all the other topics that are yet to come on this podcast. And I just remind everybody to step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen.